Welcome, my friends, to another episode of Prescription for Health. Today, we're going to be talking about counseling. And as you know, there are many dimensions to counseling, and we are very blessed and very fortunate to have somebody with a master's degree in counseling who has just set up shop in Paris, Texas. We just want to make sure that you know her and the kind of work she does. And this is Sequoia Brown. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Very good. Why don't you tell our audience what counseling really is?
Basically, it's just being able to find insight to your problems, someone to help you, not necessarily guide you in the right direction, but help lead you to where you need to be.
Okay.
And help you to cope with your problems, just any ailments that you may have.
Okay. So this really goes into mental issues. And what kind of education do you have to be a counselor? I know there are different kinds of counselors. And I hear Christian counseling. I don't really know what that means. I hear just regular counseling. I don't know what that means. And I'm sure there are many people in that gray area also saying, what is counseling? And I know quite a few number of people probably have already had counseling, so they understand. But many people don't really know what to expect when they go to a counselor's office. So just let
I think a lot of people expect mainly negative things because it has such a cliche going back from the 50s and 60s. But I mean, it's good. It promotes a sense of well-being, helps you really figure out who you are or where you need to be in life, or basically just fix not necessarily fix, but help promote, or I guess a better sense of well-being.
Okay, very good. So when you do counseling, it's really trying to get to the root of the problem.
Correct.
And you get to the root of the problem by different means, either Christian counseling or something of that nature. But what kind of education do you have to have for something like that? I know you have a master's. Is there something above that? Is there something below that? How do you...
Well, there's several things below it, that's for sure. And there's some things above it. Typically, it just depends on what kind of license you're wanting. For instance, I have a LPC, which means Licensed Professional Counselor. And to obtain that, basically, you have to have a master's in basically human services, meaning that's sociology, social work, psychology, so any of those backgrounds. I came from a psychological background, clinical psychology. And for instance, you can get an LPA, which is a licensed psychological associate, which basically deems you to be able to practice under a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And basically, when you come from a psychological background, it enables you to be able to practice just like a psychologist can, but there's just a few things that you can't do. So there's a few limitations on it, but not very much.
Okay. So what kind of people would need your services?
Basically, anyone just needing help, whether it's family problems, psychiatric problems, any mental disorder, or just basically just want a better sense of well-being or a better life, coping with day-to-day problems. Because when people think of a counselor, they automatically assume that you have to have some type of mental instability or incapacitated. That's most definitely not. That's for the furthest thing from the truth. So just anyone.
And that is one of the things I hear a lot. People, and that's why people don't like to go to counseling, and because of the stereotype, they think it's a mental problem. But if you have a heart attack, what do? You go to a cardiologist.
Exactly.
If you have diabetes, you go to an internist. But when something's wrong with the head,
exactly,
the whole society thinks something's wrong with you. But do you think it's probably from the age-old concept of thinking that things were evil spirit because of the things you did, or you're not strong enough? There are very many different stereotypes. People, if you go to a counselor, you're not strong enough, you can't handle it by yourself. You should be strong. Or in those days, people think because of the things you did wrong, that's what is coming. Now you don't have the ability to cope with life stressors. But to be able to talk to somebody who is a professional like you, I think it's a wonderful thing. What do you think?
Yeah. I think basically people just really turn to their pastors and to their church for help, which is fine. I think that's great and that's fantastic. But sometimes you need a professional opinion. Not saying that they're professional or anything of that nature, but sometimes it can almost intrude a little bias, just depending on.
Yeah, you just hit on something. You just hit on something because I think when you go to your pastor, it's okay, like you said. Nobody is knocking that. But there is the need for a professional methodology.
Correct.
That is somebody who has a systematic approach to counseling. You're not just going to the office to sit down and talk.
Right, correct.
You want somebody, a professional like you, who will be able to guide the conversation so you can understand where the issue the person is wrestling with. Am I correct in saying that?
That's exactly right. Typically what I tell people, usually all my clients, I like to do an assessment on them versus when you do pastoral counseling or anything like that. It takes people, and I don't want to say everyone as a population, but a lot of the times when people come in with their problems, either they don't know the underlying issue or they know the underlying issue and they're not willing to tell you, basically denial or anything along those lines. So basically when you start doing psychological assessments, basically it just gives you a brief snapshot of the person's personality and maybe things, the underlying issues versus depression or anything of that nature.
Yes, and people might be suffering from something, they don't even know they're suffering from that thing. And so it takes somebody like you to kind of fish it out. And maybe it really may not be just counseling, there may be other issues, psychosocial issues that influence and impact the person.
Correct.
So you are able to really do a lot of triage from your assessment.
Yes.
But what about therapy? Do you also do therapy?
Yes, I do therapy with all my clients. Mainly I do CBT, but I like to do an eclectic approach. So basically, I don't use CBT for all of my clients. I only deem it when it's necessary. So basically, if this client needs CBT, that's great. That's what I'll use. Or if the next client may need client-centered or person-centered, then that's what I'll use. Or if the next person needs Gestalt, that's just what I'll use. But I don't solely just deem myself to one type of therapy. Okay, so it just really depends on what that person needs and what they're basically less resistant to.
Very, very good. Well, how do we break the barrier or the barrier that prevent people from seeking help when it comes to mental issue? You may not actually have mental problem. You just probably just going through something, as we will say it colloquially.
Right.
You're just going through something. Oh, let me give you a story. There was one Saturday, one person came into the clinic. He was ready to kill himself. We were asking why. He said because of what his father did to his daughter, 5-year-old daughter.
Right.
But it required medication, but it also required talking to somebody, talking to him. And that set him on the path. Do you think just psychological or psychological assessment and therapy is sufficient to really take care of somebody with mental or an emotional problem? Or do you think counseling plus medication can help people in most cases?
It really depends on the severity of the case. I think most of the time with people who are on prescription meds, they really do need to seek counseling because, I mean, research shows that it's beneficial to have the medication and counseling because there's no point of taking the medication and then you're just treating the biological symptom. You're not really treating the mental or the emotional aspect of it. So I think that people who are on basically psychiatric medications should really seek counseling. And basically to remove some of the bias or the prejudice off of counseling, I just really tell people, I mean, you have to treat your body like it's a car. I mean, it's the same concept. You have to get your oil changed. You have to do maintenance. You have to change brakes. why not do your emotional well-being the same way? I mean, you might not have a problem, you know, today, but it's always good to go in and be like, you know what, I just wanted to talk about maybe a situation that happened to me today, versus letting things just build up and pile up and pile up, and then one day you just explode and you may lose your job, or you may something to your wife or husband that you didn't mean. So it's really good to just come in every once in a while to, I guess, basically to make sure that you're able to express yourself correctly.
Yes, yes.
And that's a lot of problems, you know, that people have these days. They don't really know how to express themselves.
That is very correct. Yeah, I as you know, in the pharmacy, I come across a lot of people. They just think if you take medicine, you should fix it.
Correct.
That's the reason I was asking that. But I also know too that there is counseling associated with a very robust treatment modality, and people always say, I can't afford it, or people say, I can't afford to go because insurance doesn't pay.
Right.
Does insurance reimburse you for what you do, or do you have to apply for all these insurances just like pharmacists and doctors do?
As for myself, yes, because
Okay.
I know that it can be a really expensive process. So I take, for myself, I take Blue Cross Blue Shield and Medicaid at this moment. A lot of other therapists or counselors, they may not, only because, as everyone knows, I mean, insurance is very difficult to deal with. You know, they come in and they audit you, they tear everything up, they spend, you know, hours and hours, and they tell you that you can't do this and you can't do that until we're finished, and then they tear your new front. So some people just don't want to deal with that.
Right.
But I understand that, everyone needs help.
Right.
And so if I have to deal with the insurance company, that's just something that I just need to do to be able to help everyone else.
Okay.
So I don't mind.
Yeah, and I'm sure you talk about the expense. I'm sure counseling can be a very long process, because you can just come to a counselor's office, sit down one day, and then they talk about it, and then you're gone. Just like a chiropractor, you have to keep going back. Just like a regular physician, you have to keep going back until the issues in your life are resolved.
Exactly.
Is that a correct assessment?
Yes, it's really beneficial when people come I like to see mine every week.
Okay.
Every 2 weeks, to me, a lot can happen in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I know when you come every week, basically I'm checking on you. A lot of things can transpire throughout the week. And when you do that persistently over a month, it's like you're constantly like reiterating those coping mechanisms. You're constantly reiterating that basically I'm going to be okay. It's it's not the end of the world. Just like, for instance, like when you teach kids how to multiply or add or subtract, it's just the constant reiteration.
Right.
It's the same thing with therapy. A lot of people don't like to look at it like that, but it's, when you have that person that's constantly not watching over you, but making sure that you're okay and you have that unconditional positive regard, and you have someone to talk to that's not going to pass judgment on you. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. I mean, because we can sit here and say that we have family and they understand what we're going through, or we have these aunts and uncles and cousins and best friends that we can talk to, but at the end of the day, to know that you can talk to that person that's directly across from you and not worry about, what are they thinking about me, or passing judgment on you, or basically just saying, going back and telling, whatever you just told them.
Yes.
So, you have that confidence within that person. So.
Okay. Very good. So, so if you were going to, I know you say you do almost everything, but is there a particular area you're more drawn to, or tell our audience as to specific things, like, do you deal with marriage counseling? Do you deal with divorce cases? Are you more into depression?
Basically, I deal mostly with children, adolescent, geriatric, family. I really don't do very much divorce cases, and I really don't do very much marital counseling.
Okay, so children, adolescent, and geriatrics. Okay.
Yes, and
for some people, geriatrics is the older folks like me. Okay, so geriatrics and then adolescent ages. Okay, everybody knows.
Basically 4 to
Yes.
teenage years
Okay.
and on up. And as far as disorders, it can be attention deficit disorder, bipolar disorder, major depression.
PTSD, for instance?
Yes, anxiety,
Okay.
generalized anxiety, phobias, anything of those natures, and also personality disorders, mainly borderline.
You want to deal with personality disorder? In all my training, personality disorder is what most people get away from.
Well, borderline is about as far as I go.
Okay.
Anything more than that, I'm drained by then. I was like, oh.
Yes, that's... So before we go on a short commercial break, what is the duration for each session? Do you specify the time, or it just depends on the condition and the person?
Typically I run about 55 minutes, but sometimes I can't end it in 55 minutes. Sometimes it takes people an hour and a half, so just whatever they need, and exactly when that hour and a half hits, I got it. I'm like, oh, thank God. So, you know, but average it runs about 55 minutes.
Okay. When we come back from a short commercial break, we are going to be talking about the treatment, the different methods of treatment. And thank you, Sequoia, for coming to the studio. And I hope all our audience people, they are listening and truly soaking this in. And I hope when we talk about the treatment strategies, maybe you can show some of your products that you have in your office. We'll be right back.